For 9 years, Elara Ashwood loved the Alpha King in silence. She never confessed, never asked, never made him choose. Then the day came when he stood before the entire court and announced he was marrying someone else. And Elara did something no one expected. She smiled, she applauded, and she made the quietest decision of her life. That's enough. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from rejection. It comes from realizing the person you love never knew there was a choice to make. Rowan Valamont was the most perceptive man in any room he entered, except it turned out, the rooms that mattered most. And Chapter 1. The castle had a particular sound at dawn. Not silence. Silence was too clean a word for it. It was something older. The kind of quiet that settles into stone after centuries of being lived in, argued in, grieved in. The kind that remembers. Elara Ashwood had grown up inside that quiet. She knew which corridor smelled of pine resin and which smelled of iron. She knew which stairs held secrets. She knew the sound of the king's footsteps before any guard announced him. Not because they were loud, but because she had been listening for them, without meaning to, for longer than she could honestly admit. She was not a lady. She held no title. Her father had been the royal healer, and when he died, the castle had simply kept her, the way certain things are kept, not because anyone decided it, but because removing them would have changed the shape of everything else. She was 26 years old. She was good at her work. She had loved Rowan Valamont for longer than she could remember. She had never told him. She never planned to. The council chamber was already full when she arrived. She took her place at the side table, not at the council table, never there, but close enough to be useful, and opened her ledger. The ministers were still arranging themselves, still performing the small rituals of importance that men perform before they are required to say anything of substance. Rowan entered without announcement. The room changed when he walked in. Not dramatically. Not the way stories describe it with cold winds and silenced crowds. It was subtler than that. A collective straightening. A held breath. The particular quality of attention that power produces in a room not because it demands it, but because it cannot help it. He moved to the head of the table without looking at anyone. Then, before he sat, before he acknowledged a single minister or reviewed a single document, his gaze crossed the room and found Elara. Not deliberately. She had watched him long enough to know the difference between deliberate and instinct. This was instinct. She gave a small nod. The northern reports are already marked. Kerwin's figures are wrong. Merrick will push for force on the border question. Don't let him. She communicated none of this aloud. She didn't need to. Rowan sat down. Begin. The council lasted 3 hours. Elara wrote and watched. The slight tightening of his jaw when Kerwin exaggerated numbers. The brief stillness when Merrick suggested force where patience would do. The way his fingers stopped moving whenever the discussion drifted somewhere he did not yet trust. When the argument over the eastern grain stores grew heated, he raised one hand. The room stopped. His gaze moved, not to the loudest voice, not to the most senior minister, to Elara. What do you think? Several heads turned. A few of the newer ministers still found it startling, that habit of his. The older ones had stopped questioning it years ago. The stores will last 6 weeks if rationed carefully, Elara said. 8 if the Western packs release their surplus. They won't do it without a crown guarantee before winter. Lord Merrick frowned. The Western packs are loyal. They are practical, Elara said. Loyalty doesn't feed children. A silence. Rowan considered it for exactly the length of time it deserved. Send the guarantee. It was always like this. He trusted her with things he didn't name. Her memory, her judgment, the quiet efficiency with which she anticipated what he needed before he understood he needed it. She had stopped noticing how naturally she did it. She suspected he had stopped noticing too. That was the problem. After the council, when the ministers filed out and the chamber emptied, Rowan remained at the table with the day's remaining correspondence. Elara had already sorted the letters by urgency. She had done it before he asked, before he even sat back down. She hadn't noticed herself doing it. He noticed. He said nothing. But his hand went directly to the first envelope without hesitating, without checking the stack, as if he knew the order would be right. It was always right. While he read, Elara updated the council records. The silence between them was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The silence of two people who had learned to occupy the same space without disturbing each other. At some point, Rowan stopped reading. Elara didn't look up, but she felt the pause. "Aldrich's proposal," he said. "What do you think of it?" There was no proposal from Aldrich on the day's agenda. He was thinking aloud, which meant he was thinking with her, using her presence the same way he used the table, the chair, the light from the window, without noticing. "Aldrich wants the northern route for himself," Elara said, without lifting her eyes. "The proposal looks reasonable because he buried the part that isn't." A pause. "Where?" "Clause 6, second paragraph." He turned the pages, found it, read it. "You saw this morning?" "Last week." He looked at her then. That look, precise, brief, that wasn't quite gratitude but contained something gratitude alone couldn't fully name. "Why didn't you mention it sooner?" "Because you hadn't reached Aldrich's proposal yet." She finally raised her eyes. "You get to everything at the right time. I just make sure the pieces are in place when you do." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back to the letter. "Reject the proposal. Draft the response." "It's already drafted." This time he didn't answer. But she saw it. The slight shift in his posture. The almost imperceptible release in his shoulders. The different quality of the silence that followed. Elara placed a small wrapped parcel beside his papers without comment. He glanced at it. "What is that?" "Food." "I didn't ask for food." "You rarely ask for what you need." He looked up at her then. Really looked. The way he occasionally did when something she said landed differently than expected, when the words carried more weight than their surface. For one moment she thought, perhaps today. Then the doors opened. Lord Merrick entered with Lady Seraphina Thornvale. Elara knew before anyone spoke. She knew from Rowan's stillness, from Merrick's careful smile, from the particular quality of the silence that followed them into the room. Seraphina was exactly what a kingdom required. Composed, strategic, the daughter of a lord who controlled the western passes and 3 border pacts, whose loyalty had become increasingly expensive. She was not cruel. She was not foolish. She was precisely what an alliance looked like when it wore a beautiful face. "Your Majesty," Seraphina said. "Lady Thornvale." Merrick cleared his throat. "The council believes it is time to formalize the arrangement." Elara lowered her eyes to her ledger. She felt it then, a ripple in the air, the way she had learned to feel it after years of proximity. Rowan's wolf, stirring beneath the surface. Not excitement, not recognition, resistance. She had always been able to feel it. The wolf had never hidden from her the way the man did. Rowan's gaze dropped to the documents before him. Then, the old instinct, the one he never examined. He looked at her. At Elara. Not at Merrick. Not at Seraphina. At her. "What do you think?" he asked. Every year gathered behind her ribs. Every report reviewed so he wouldn't carry the kingdom alone. Every meal left outside his door. Every wound cleaned. Every sleepless night. Every small, careful act of love disguised as usefulness. Offered without expectation because expectation would have made it unbearable. The wolf inside him was still now, completely still, watching her with the patient certainty it had shown since she was 17 years old, as if it had always known something the man refused to learn. Ilara looked at Rowan, at the king, at the boy he had been, at the man she had loved too long in silence. She smiled, a small, soft, perfect court smile. "I think," she said, "the kingdom will be stronger for it." Something moved through his eyes, too brief to name, too late to matter. "Then we proceed." The room continued. Merrick spoke. Serafina nodded. Papers were produced. Ilara gathered her notes, her ledger, her careful, invisible life, and walked out of the council chamber while the court began preparing the announcement that would secure the kingdom. No one noticed her leave. That was the part she had always known would be true. Not the announcement. Not the alliance. Just that. The leaving unnoticed. The door closing quietly behind her. The corridor empty in both directions. She had spent years making herself useful. She had learned somewhere along the way that useful and necessary were not the same thing. And she had loved him long enough to know the difference. Standing in that corridor, with the sound of the council chamber fading behind her, Ilara Ashwood made the quietest decision of her life. That's enough. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply stood in the old stone quiet of the castle she had grown up in, and she let something go. The shape of a woman who waits. Once you set that down, you cannot simply pick it back up again. That's the part of this story I always return to. Not the announcement. Not his eyes finding hers one last time. The moment she decided to stop. She did not go back to her rooms that night. Not immediately. She walked instead, through the eastern corridor, past the infirmary, past the library with its familiar smell of old paper and tallow candles, past the small window at the end of the north wing, where she had stood 100 times watching the training grounds below. The castle moved around her the way it always did, indifferent and enormous, full of people who had somewhere to be. She had always had somewhere to be too. That was the strange part. Not the grief. She had expected the grief, had lived alongside it for years in a manageable form. The way you live alongside a chronic ache and learn to mistake it for normal. What she hadn't expected was the clarity. That's enough. The words had arrived without drama, no tears behind them, no anger. Just the particular exhaustion of a person who has finally, quietly, set down something very heavy. She stopped at the window. Below, the training grounds were empty. Torches burned along the perimeter, throwing long shadows across the dirt. Somewhere in the castle behind her, Lord Merrick was drafting announcements. Lady Serafina was being shown to her guest chambers. Rowan was doing whatever kings do when they have just made a decision that costs nothing they can feel yet. Ilara pressed her fingers against the cold stone of the windowsill. She had imagined this moment before. Not this specific moment. She hadn't known about Serafina, hadn't known about the arrangement, but some version of it. The moment when the waiting became undeniable. When the thing she had refused to call hope finally showed its true shape. She had imagined she would feel broken. She felt instead very still. She requested an audience with the king the following morning. This was unusual. She did not request audiences. She simply appeared where she was needed, and that had always been enough. Requesting an audience meant formality. Distance. The deliberate construction of a space that hadn't existed between them before. His steward looked at her strangely. "He will see you at the 3rd hour." She arrived exactly on time. Rowan was standing at the window when she entered, the tall one in his private study, overlooking the forest rather than the grounds. He turned when he heard her steps, and something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not concern, not guilt. Something she couldn't name and had stopped trying to. Ilara. Your Majesty. She kept her hands folded in front of her. Steady. I've been offered a position in Velmore, a village post. Their previous healer passed last winter and they haven't replaced him. I would like your permission to accept it. The silence that followed was very brief. It felt longer. Velmore, he said. 2 days ride east. He looked at her with the precise attention she knew so well. The attention that assessed situations, measured variables, identified the most efficient path forward. She had watched him apply it to border disputes and grain shortages and diplomatic crises. She had not expected it to feel like this, turned toward her. This is sudden, he said. I've been considering it for some time. He looked at her. Not the efficient assessment she knew from counsel, something slower than that, less certain of what it was measuring. You didn't mention it. It wasn't decided. You mention things before they're decided. That's why I find them useful. It was not a rebuke. It was an observation, the kind he made when a pattern he relied on had shifted without explanation. This one was different, she said. How? Not a question. The word landed flat, the way his words did when he wanted an answer, but wasn't sure he was entitled to one. Ilara held his gaze for a moment. She thought about telling him. Not everything. Not the years, not the cost, not the shape of the thing she was finally setting down. But something true. Something that would let him understand, without requiring him to feel it. She decided against it. It was personal, she said. The decision was personal. He was quiet. She watched something move through his expression. Not understanding, not quite, but the uneasy awareness that understanding was somewhere nearby, and he had missed the turn toward it. Then he looked back at the documents on his desk. I'll have the transfer documents prepared, he said. You'll need a letter of introduction from the Crown. Thank you. She turned to leave. Ilara. She stopped, did not turn around. Velmore is a small post, he said. You're wasted there. It was the closest thing to stay that he knew how to say. She understood that. She had always understood his language better than he knew. I'll manage, she said, and she left. She was gone within the week. She packed quietly, the way she had always moved through the castle, without announcement, without fuss. Her books, her herbs, the small wooden box her father had left her, worn smooth at the corners from years of handling. She left nothing behind that she wanted to keep. She said goodbye to the people who mattered. The head cook, who pressed a wrapped parcel of bread and dried fruit into her hands, and didn't ask questions. Old Marin from the infirmary, who held her face between both palms and looked at her for a long moment before letting go. The young stable hand who had, for 3 years, saved the best apple from the morning delivery for her horse. She did not say goodbye to Rowan. There was nothing left to say that she could afford to say. On the morning she left, the castle was quiet. The kind of quiet she had grown up inside. The kind that remembers. She rode out through the eastern gate as the sun came up, and she did not look back. She told herself it was because there was nothing to see. I think she knew even then that if she looked back, she might see him standing somewhere in the castle's shadow, watching her go, and that would have made everything harder. Some doors are easier to close with your eyes forward. She was always very good at the necessary things. Chapter 2. The first day he didn't notice. That was the honest truth of it, and it mattered, because the story of what happened to Rowan Valamont did not begin with a dramatic realization. It began with nothing. With ordinary days proceeding in their ordinary way, and a small persistent wrongness that he could not locate. The council met. He attended. The correspondence arrived in the correct order on his desk, because he had asked his steward to maintain Ilara's system, and the steward had done his best, and it was almost right. Almost. There was a letter from Aldrich's office that should have been flagged and wasn't. A minor discrepancy in the northern accounts that he caught only because he happened to read past the summary. Small things. The kind of things that didn't matter individually. He noted them without examining why he was noting them. The second week was different. He was in the middle of a council session. Merrick presenting a revised trade proposal, the other ministers arranged in their usual positions of practiced attentiveness, when he reached a number that didn't align with figures he remembered from the previous month's report. He looked up. His gaze went, without instruction, to the side table. Empty. He looked back at Merrick. Continue. But something had snagged. A small catch in the machinery of the day, too minor to name, too persistent to ignore. He found himself, later, standing in the doorway of the council chamber after everyone had gone, looking at the side table with the particular attention he usually reserved for problems he hadn't yet solved. Her chair, her table. The place where her ledger had always been open, where her pen had always been moving, where she had always been, present and quiet and entirely reliable. Empty. He did not think, I miss her. He thought, this is inefficient. He thought, I should find a replacement. He thought, at the very edge of something he wasn't ready to examine. When was the last time I spoke to her? He couldn't remember. The room told him more than he expected. He went 3 weeks after her departure. Not because he intended to, but because the eastern corridor was the most direct route between the council chamber and the private library, and he had been taking it for years without thinking about it. He passed the door to her old quarters the way he passed every door in the castle, without stopping. Then he stopped. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The shelves were bare. The small writing desk was empty, its surface clean in a way that felt recent, the way a room feels recently abandoned rather than long unused. The dried herbs that had always hung above the window. He hadn't known he'd noticed them until they weren't there. Were gone. The particular smell of the room, something he couldn't have described but apparently knew, was already fading. He stood in the doorway for a moment. His wolf was very still. Not the comfortable stillness it settled into when she entered a room. Something different. The stillness of an animal that has searched a familiar territory and come back with nothing. Confused, not yet alarmed, processing the absence of a thing it had relied on without cataloging. Rowan understood animals. He understood this. He did not let himself understand what it meant. He pulled the door closed and continued down the corridor. A month after her departure, he received the standard report from Velmore. Administrative updates, a census correction, a request for additional medical supplies, neatly itemized and properly formatted, with clear justification for each line. He read it twice. The handwriting was familiar in a way that stopped him before he identified why. Then he did. He set the report down, picked it up again. She was fine. That was the evident fact. The report was thorough and competent, and entirely characteristic of her. She was doing the work. The village was benefiting. Everything was proceeding as it should. He didn't know why that felt wrong. He sat with the report in his hands for longer than it required, in the quiet of his study, while his wolf turned the absence over and over, in the way animals turn unfamiliar things, not understanding, but refusing to let go. When was the last time I asked how she was? The question arrived without warning. He tried to answer it. He couldn't. Not once. He had never asked, not because he hadn't cared, but because it had never occurred to him that she might need to be asked. She had always simply been there, competent and constant, and he had accepted her presence the way he accepted the castle walls, as a given, as something permanent. You mention things before they're decided. He had said that to her. He remembered it now with a clarity that felt disproportionate. A small conversation, a routine morning. She had told him she was leaving, and something in the pattern had shifted, and he had noticed the shift without understanding its source. He had the uncomfortable sense that she had told him more than he realized. He approved the supply request. He wrote nothing in the margin. He almost did. That was the moment his aide noticed something had changed. Not when she left. Not in the weeks of small disruptions. Here. A man sitting alone with a report he had already approved, not putting it down. Rowan would have said he was simply being thorough. His wolf would not have bothered with an explanation. Velmore smelled like wood smoke and rain. That was the first thing Alara noticed when she arrived. Not the size of the village, not the suspicious looks from the 3 men watching from the inn's doorway, not the state of the small stone building that would become her workroom. Just the smell. Clean and ordinary, and entirely unlike the castle. She had not expected to feel relief. She felt it anyway. The villagers took their time with her. This was fair. She was young. She was a woman. And she had arrived with a letter from the crown that several of the older residents seemed to regard as more suspicious than reassuring. Their previous healer had been a local man, born 3 miles east, trained by his father. Alara was neither local nor trained by anyone they knew. She did not argue. She did not explain herself. She worked. The first week, a child with a persistent fever that had resisted the usual remedies. Alara identified the source, contaminated water from the eastern well, and solved the problem before she solved the fever. The child recovered. The well was closed. The second week, 2 cases of a joint inflammation that had been mismanaged for months, causing unnecessary suffering. She adjusted the treatments. Within days, the improvement was visible. By the 3rd week, people stopped watching her from doorways. Ethan Hale introduced himself on a Tuesday. He was the village's informal physician, not trained, not titled, but practically the only person for miles with any medical knowledge and a willingness to use it. He had been covering the gap since the previous healer's death, doing what he could with limited supplies and considerable common sense. He was not what she expected. He shook her hand the way people shake hands when they mean it, firmly, without performance, and said, "I'm glad you're here. I've been in over my head for months." No resentment, no territorial posturing, just honesty. Alara found that unexpectedly disarming. They fell into a working partnership without discussion. He knew the village, the families, the histories. She knew medicine. Together they were considerably more useful than either was alone, and both of them were practical enough to recognize it immediately. He asked her questions about her work without assuming she would simplify the answers. She answered without simplifying them. It was, she realized after the first week of it, the most straightforward professional relationship she'd had in years, possibly ever. There was no subtext, no careful navigation of what she could say and what she should leave unsaid, no part of herself that she had to fold away and pretend wasn't there. She hadn't known how heavy that was until she put it down. Spring came early to Velmore. Alara developed routines she hadn't planned. Morning rounds before the workroom opened. Tea with the baker's wife on Thursdays, who had initially come for a consultation about her back and stayed somehow for conversation. A walk along the eastern path every evening before dark, where the fields ran flat toward the tree line, and the sky was enormous and unhurried. She slept well. This surprised her more than anything else. She had not slept well in years. Not deeply. Not without the low, persistent hum of the castle in the background, the weight of the next day's work, the older and heavier weight of loving someone in the wrong direction. Here the nights were quiet in a different way than the castle's quiet. Younger. Less burdened. She stopped counting days. She stopped doing the small mental calculations she had performed every morning for years without noticing. The one that began with, "Where will he be today?" and ended with, "Will I see him?" She didn't decide to stop. It simply became irrelevant. the way old habits become irrelevant when there's nothing left to attach them to. She thought about him sometimes. Of course she did. But the thoughts arrived and passed without the old undertow. He was part of a life she had lived. He was not part of this one. That felt, more than anything else, like recovery. One evening in late spring, Ethan found her at the eastern path. He fell into step beside her without asking. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that had developed between them without either of them engineering it. "You seem different than when you arrived," he said eventually. "Different how?" He considered it. Less careful. Elara looked at the tree line. The light was going gold at the edges, the way it did here just before dark, unhurried, unspectacular, entirely itself. "Yes," she said. "I suppose I am." She didn't know that evening, that 3 days later, a rider would arrive in Velmore with the crown's seal on his saddlebag. She didn't know that Rowan had sent him not for any administrative reason, but because something in him had decided that a standard report was no longer sufficient. She was walking in the last of the evening light, less careful than she had been in years. She had stopped waiting. That was the part he wasn't prepared for. Rowan had not planned to go himself. That had been the intention. Send a rider, receive a report, confirm that the administrative transition was proceeding correctly. The kind of routine oversight that required no personal involvement. He had told himself this clearly, in the logical language he used for decisions that didn't require examination. Then he had ridden to Velmore anyway. He told himself it was because the eastern border situation required his personal attention in the region. This was partially true. He allowed the partial truth to stand in for the whole, and did not look too closely at the remainder. The village was smaller than he expected. Quiet in the way that villages are quiet. Not the castle's ancient weighted silence, but something younger and more ordinary. Wood smoke. The sound of a hammer somewhere distant. Children in the road who stopped to stare at the unfamiliar horses, and then, losing interest, continued whatever they had been doing. His aide located the workroom without difficulty. The Crown's letter of introduction had preceded them, and the village clearly knew he was coming. Elara did not come to meet him. He waited a few minutes in the small front room, herbs drying above the window, neat shelves of labeled jars, a desk with an open ledger and handwriting he recognized. And then she appeared through the inner door with a cloth in her hands, and the expression of someone who had been interrupted mid-task. She looked at him. "Your Majesty," she said. Calm, unhurried. The same voice she had always used in council. Something about that was wrong. He couldn't identify what. "Elara." He looked at her. He had been looking at people for years, measuring them, reading them, extracting what was useful. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He looked at Elara and found he could not read what he was seeing. She was the same. That was the first thing. The same careful posture, the same direct gaze, the same quality of attention that had always made him feel, obscurely, that she was seeing slightly more than he intended to show. She was wearing simpler clothes than at the castle, a plain work dress, her hair less formally arranged. And she looked entirely at ease inside them, inside this room, inside this life, in a way that landed somewhere in his chest before he could analyze it. He had come prepared to find her diminished. Not unhappy, exactly. He was not a man who wished unhappiness on people. But smaller, somehow. Reduced. The castle was the largest thing most people in it would ever inhabit, and leaving it usually produced a particular kind of quiet grief. The grief of people who had been near power and were no longer. Elara did not look like that. She looked like a woman who had put something down and found, to her own surprise, that her hands worked better without it. "I received your supply request," he said, because he needed to say something, and that was the reason he had come, or the reason he had told himself. "I can walk you through the itemization if anything needs clarification." "It doesn't." He paused. It was well prepared. It usually is. A silence. Not the familiar silence of the council chamber, where quiet meant thinking. A different silence, one he didn't know how to occupy. He became aware, at the edge of his attention, of voices outside. A man's voice, and then a child's, and then laughter. The easy laughter of people who were not performing it. Ilara's head turned slightly toward the window. A small thing, involuntary. "You have patients waiting," he said. "A few. They know I have a visitor." She looked back at him. "Is there something specific you needed, Your Majesty? Something the report didn't cover?" There it was again. That wrongness he couldn't locate. She was perfectly courteous, perfectly professional. She was speaking to him the way she had always spoken to him in council, in corridors, in the careful daily architecture of the castle's business. That was it. She was speaking to him the way she spoke to everyone. The particular frequency of her attention, the one he hadn't known he relied on until he was standing in a small room in a village 2 days' ride from his kingdom, looking at a woman who was looking at him the way she looked at anyone, was gone. Not hostile, not cold, just gone. "How are you?" he asked. The question surprised them both. He did not ask people how they were. It was not evasion. It was simply that the question had always seemed imprecise. He preferred specifics. He preferred useful information. Ilara looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't read. "I'm well," she said. And then, because she had always been honest, "Better than I expected." Through the window, the man's voice again. Closer now. A knock at the workroom door, and then it opened. A man roughly Rowan's age, unremarkable in every visible way except for the ease with which he entered, the familiarity of someone who belonged in this space. He stopped when he saw Rowan. "Sorry, I didn't realize you were still—" "Ethan." Ilara's voice was unhurried. "This is the Alpha King. Your Majesty, this is Ethan Hale. He manages most of the village's medical needs. We work together." The man, Ethan, met his gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who was not intimidated, but was making a genuine effort to be respectful. He nodded. "Your Majesty?" Rowan looked at him, then at Ilara. Ilara was looking at Ethan with the expression of someone who was comfortable. Not in love. He was reading the room carefully now, for the first time in his life reading a room because he needed to know, not because it was efficient, but at ease. The ease of two people who had learned each other's rhythms without effort, the way she had always been with him. Except she had grown into that ease with this man in 3 months. It had taken her years with Rowan. Years of careful, invisible work. And he had accepted it the way he accepted the castle walls. As a given. As something permanent. "I won't keep you," Rowan said. He said goodbye to them both with the correct words in the correct order. He walked out of the workroom into the spring afternoon, into the smell of wood smoke and rain, and stood for a moment in the road, while his aide waited at a respectful distance. His wolf was very still, not the confused stillness of the past months. Something older and more certain, the stillness of an animal that has finally understood what it is looking at, and is not sure it arrived in time. Rowan stared at the middle distance. She was not waiting. He had ridden 2 days, and she was not waiting, and he had not known until this moment how completely he had assumed she would be. That was the thing about Rowan Valamont. He was the most perceptive man in any room he entered. Except, it turned out, the rooms that mattered most. Chapter 3. Rowan stayed in Velmore longer than he intended. This was unlike him. He was a man of precise schedules and deliberate departures, and the eastern border situation, the justification he had given himself for the journey, had been resolved in a single afternoon meeting with the regional lord. There was no administrative reason to remain. He remained anyway. He told his aide he was reviewing the village's resource allocation. His aide, who had served him for 6 years and was not a foolish man, said nothing and adjusted the schedule accordingly. He saw her working, not in the workroom, in the village itself. Moving between houses with her bag over her shoulder, stopping to speak with an elderly woman outside the mill, crouching down to examine a child's bandaged arm with the focused attention he recognized from 100 council mornings. She was different here. Not different in the ways he had expected. Not smaller, not diminished, not performing competence for an audience that outranked her. Different in the way that people are different when they are not adjusting themselves to fit a space. She moved through Velmore as if Velmore had been built around her, which was impossible. She had been here 3 months, but the village had the quality of something that had already shaped itself to include her. He watched from a distance and did not approach. His wolf watched with him. Patient. Attentive. The way it watched things it had already decided about. He saw Ethan Hale choose her on a Thursday. It wasn't a dramatic moment. That was what made it effective. There was a gathering in the village square, some minor local occasion, the kind that villages produce regularly and cities forget how to have. Food on tables, children running, the uncomplicated noise of people who liked each other. Elara was there, standing with the baker's wife, laughing at something Rowan hadn't heard. A real laugh, unguarded, unperformed, the laugh of someone who had forgotten to be careful. He had never heard that laugh before. Ethan crossed the square toward her with the directness of a man who knew where he was going. He said something to the baker's wife, who smiled and stepped away. Then he handed Elara a cup, said something quiet, and stood beside her with the ease of someone who had decided, without announcement or hesitation, that this was where he wanted to be. No calculation, no political consideration, no assessment of what the gesture cost or what it would produce. He simply chose her, publicly, without making it a statement. Rowan stood at the edge of the square and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has just seen his own failure demonstrated, exactly what he had never done. Not once. In all the years Elara had been part of his life, in all the mornings she had anticipated his needs, all the councils where he had reached for her judgment before any other, all the small, careful ways she had made his life function, he had never once crossed a room toward her simply because he wanted to be where she was. He had accepted her presence the way he accepted necessary things. He had never chosen it. He found Ethan alone that evening, near the stable. Ethan saw him coming and waited with the stillness of a man who was not afraid, but understood the situation clearly. "You should know," Rowan said, without preamble, "that she is—" He stopped. What was the word? Remarkable seemed insufficient. Important seemed like the wrong category. Mine rose to the surface and he pushed it back down because it was exactly the kind of thinking that had created every problem he was now standing inside. "I know who she is," Ethan said quietly. Rowan looked at him. "I've known since the second week," Ethan said. "The way she reorganized the supply shelves. The way she talks about the village like she's already responsible for it." A pause. "The way she never mentions the castle. And yet I'm not asking her to forget anything." Ethan met his gaze without apology. "I'm asking her if she wants company for what comes next." The simplicity of it landed somewhere uncomfortable. Rowan had spent his life making decisions of consequence. Decisions that moved borders, fed thousands, shaped the future of packs and people and political alliances. He was good at it. He had never doubted it. He had never once made a decision simply because someone deserved to be chosen. He walked back to the inn through the dark village, past the square where the gathering had ended and the tables were being cleared, past the workroom with its light still burning in the window. He did not stop. But his wolf turned toward that light and stayed turned toward it for a long time after the rest of him had moved on. He rode back to the castle the following morning. The engagement still existed. Serafina existed. The alliance existed. And the border pacts, and the council's expectations, and every reason he had assembled so carefully for why the kingdom required what it required. All of it existed. And for the first time since the announcement, It felt like a problem he had created, rather than a duty he had inherited. Rowan requested a private audience with Lady Seraphina Thornvale on a Monday morning. She arrived without her attendants, which told him she already knew. Seraphina was not a woman who missed patterns. It was, he had always recognized, one of the things that made the alliance valuable. She was precise and composed and entirely clear-eyed about the nature of the arrangement between them. She sat across from him with the posture of someone who had prepared for this conversation and was not going to make it more difficult than it needed to be. "Before you begin," she said, "I want you to know that I am not surprised." Rowan looked at her. "I noticed it before you did," she said. "That's not a criticism, it's simply true." She folded her hands in her lap with the calm of someone who had already done the harder work of accepting something. "There is a woman. There has always been a woman. I understood that by the third council session, the way you looked for her before you looked for anyone else, the way the room changed when she wasn't there." He said nothing. "You never looked at me that way," Seraphina said, not with bitterness, with the particular clarity of a woman who has decided that honesty is more dignified than pretense. "Not once. I told myself it would come with time. That duty becomes feeling, that proximity becomes attachment." A pause. "I was wrong about that." "Lady Seraphina, my father will withdraw the border pack support," she said. "You know that. The trade concessions will likely follow. Lord Aldrich will see an opportunity and he will take it. You will spend the next 2 years managing consequences that this conversation will create." "Yes," she looked at him. "And you've decided anyway." "I have." The silence between them was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who had been placed in an arrangement neither had chosen, and were now, finally, choosing something for themselves. "She may not have you," Seraphina said. "I know. You could lose everything you're about to lose and still not get what you're reaching for." "I know that too." Seraphina was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Not quite softness, but the closest thing to it he had seen from her. "I hope she's worth it. I hope, for your sake, that she is exactly what you seem to think she is." "She's more than I knew how to see," he said. "That's the problem I'm trying to correct." Seraphina stood. She smoothed her dress with the precise movements of a woman reclaiming her composure. At the door she paused, and he thought she might say something else. Something sharp, something earned. Instead, "Tell your counsel before the rumors do. It will be cleaner." Then she left, and the door closed quietly behind her, and Rowan sat alone in the room with the full weight of what came next. The council was not quiet. Merrick's objections were immediate and detailed, and entirely correct from a strategic standpoint. The border situation, the trade routes, the 3 packs whose loyalty had just become expensive again. He laid out the consequences with the precision of a man who had built his career on exactly this kind of calculation, and none of it was wrong. Rowan let him finish. "Your concerns are noted," he said. "The decision stands." "Your Majesty, the cost. I understand the cost." He looked at Merrick with the particular quality of attention that ended conversations. "I have been making decisions for this kingdom since I was 24 years old. I have made them carefully, and I have made them well, and I will continue to do so. This decision is made. What I need from this council now is management, not debate." The room absorbed this. Lord Aldrich did, in fact, see an opportunity. By the end of the week, he had sent a letter that was technically courteous and practically threatening. 3 border lords requested urgent audiences. The Eastern Trade Delegation postponed a scheduled meeting without explanation. Rowan attended to each of it with the methodical attention he had always brought to the kingdom's problems. He did not collapse. He did not waver. He worked, because the kingdom still required working, and he was still its king, and none of what he had lost changed that. But in the evenings, when the work was done and the castle was quiet, he sat with the full understanding that he had spent 32 years protecting something he had never examined. He had protected the kingdom. He had protected his father's legacy. He had protected himself from the particular kind of vulnerability that had destroyed the man he most admired. He had not protected anything that actually mattered. He rode to Velmore on a Friday. No advance rider this time. No administrative justification. No partial truth standing in for the whole. Just a man on a horse, riding toward something he had no guarantee of reaching, in the gray early morning while the castle was still waking up. His wolf was calm, not the confused stillness of the early months, not the tense attention of that afternoon in the square. Something older. The calm of an animal that has stopped calculating and started moving. Rowan rode east as the sun came up. He did not know what he would say. He knew only that for the first time in his life, he was not making a decision because it was correct. He was making it because it was true. His aide watched him go from the upper window. He had served Rowan Valamont for 6 years. He had watched him manage crises and navigate wars, and carry the weight of a kingdom without once letting it show. He had never seen him ride toward something uncertain. He had never seen him look from the back, like a man who had finally stopped being afraid. He found her in the eastern field. Not in the workroom, not on her morning rounds. She was at the far edge of the path she walked every evening, standing at the place where the fields ran flat toward the tree line. And she turned when she heard the horse, and went very still when she saw who it was. He dismounted, left the horse, walked toward her across the field in the gray morning light, and she waited with the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to fill silence with assumptions. "You came back," she said. "Yes." "Without a rider ahead of you?" "Yes." She looked at him with the careful attention he recognized, the same attention she had always given him, precise and unhurried, the attention that saw more than he intended to show. Except now there was something different underneath it. Not the careful distance of the workroom. Something older. Something that knew him well enough to be afraid of what he might say. "The engagement," she said, "is over." A silence. The wind moved through the grass between them. She looked at him, and he could see her processing it. Not with joy, not with relief, but with the measured caution of a woman who had already paid for hoping once. Rowan. His name. Just his name, the way she had said it years ago before she had been careful about it, and hearing it cost him something he hadn't anticipated. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know what it costs you to consider it. I'm not here to tell you that I've changed or that I understand everything I did wrong. I don't, not fully, and I think that's something I'll be learning for a long time." He stopped, steadied himself. "I'm here because I owed you honesty years ago, and I never gave it to you, and I'm trying to start now." She didn't speak. "You built something here," he said. "I saw it. I saw what you look like when you're not adjusting yourself to fit a space that was never quite shaped for you. I saw you laugh." A pause. "I had never heard you laugh like that. I had known you for 9 years, and I had never heard that." Alara looked away toward the tree line. Her jaw was set in the way it was when she was holding something steady by effort. "You're asking me to leave this," she said. "I'm asking if you would consider it. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm not asking you to forgive anything." He paused. "I'm asking you to know that I see you. Not what you can do for the kingdom. Not what you can do for me. You." She was quiet for a long time. He let her be quiet. He did not fill it. This was perhaps the hardest thing, standing in the stillness without reaching for control of it, without calculating, without producing the next useful thing. Just standing in a field in the early morning, waiting for a woman to decide, with no authority over the outcome. Then, at the edge of the field, something moved. His wolf had followed him, at distance, as it sometimes did, and he had not called it back. Now it moved past him, unhurried, and walked to Alara with the directness of something that had already made its choice years ago, and was simply finally saying so. It lay down at her feet, not in submission, in trust. The particular stillness of an animal that has arrived somewhere it recognizes as home. Alara looked down at it for a long moment. Then she reached down and placed her hand on its head, the way she had when she was a girl in a courtyard who had not yet learned to be careful, and the wolf closed its eyes. When she looked up, something had changed in her face. Not resolved, not simple, but open in a way it hadn't been since he arrived. "I need time," she said. "Take it. I'm not the same person who left the castle. I know. I'm not asking for that person. And if I decide..." She stopped, started again. "If I decide that what I've built here matters too much to leave, then I will understand," he said, "and I will mean it." He held her gaze. "But I needed you to know. I needed you to know that I love you, not the version of you that made my life function, not the version of you that waited. You, the one who stopped waiting and built something anyway." A pause. "That's the version I should have seen years ago. I'm sorry I didn't." Alara stood in the morning light with his wolf at her feet and looked at him for a long moment. "Go back to the inn," she said finally. "Give me today." He nodded, turned, walked back across the field to his horse. He did not look back. For the first time in his life, he left a decision entirely in someone else's hands and did not reach for it. She gave him her answer at sundown. He was waiting outside the inn when she found him. Not pacing, not performing patience, just standing in the last of the evening light the way a man stands when he has accepted that the outcome is no longer his to control. She crossed the distance between them. "I have one condition," she said. Rowan looked at her. Something in his face, carefully held for so long, finally came undone. "Name it." "You never get to stop seeing me. Not the useful version. Not the convenient version." She held his gaze. "Me. All of it. Even the parts that don't make your life easier." "Alara, I mean it." "I know." He took one step toward her. "I've never meant anything more." She looked at him for a long moment. The king, the man, the boy she had known since she was too young to know better. And then she let herself be found. That was answer enough. That's the part of this story I always return to. Not the years of silence, not the leaving, not even the asking. The moment she decided it was safe to begin again, and the look on his face when she did. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. And if you want more, you are welcome to subscribe. There are more stories waiting.